our third and final session, EDI and Ways Forward, and I'm very excited to introduce to you guys our first presenter, Jasmin Graham, who is a co-founder of Minorities in Shark Science, which I'm sure a lot of us have been following and cheering on. So without any further ado, I will hand it over to her.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about building a new table. As was mentioned, my name is Jasmin Graham. I am the president and CEO of Minorities in Shark Sciences, MISS for short. And we are an organization dedicated to supporting gender minorities of color who are interested in shark research and conservation. And I've titled my talk, Building a New Table, and I want to start off by telling you about the very first time that I learned the importance of building a new table. So to set the scene for you, I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. I did a magnet program in elementary school called Alert that was for kids interested in science and math. That was a program that I did all throughout elementary school. And then whenever it came time to transition into middle school, I was still really into science. And so I applied to be in a magnet program at our local middle school called the Learning Collaborative, or TLC. And this program was housed, for context, at Dent Middle School, which was formerly the Black Middle School prior to the official desegregation of schools in South Carolina, but was still segregated at the time that I was in middle school. And to give you even more context, I am not even 30, and I went to a school that was segregated, de facto segregated. So they put this magnet program here basically to change the demographics of the school so that it looked at least like it was not segregated, because there were questions being raised about the fact that this school was like 99% Black and Latina. And so that was their solution. Let's put a magnet program there. It will attract the wealthier, whiter children to go to this school. And so that's the context that I was coming into the middle school program in. And so I was really excited about science. I was really excited about the program. And then my very first day, I get there and I am slapped in the face with what I think is probably one of the biggest culture shocks I've ever experienced in my life. Where there was a section of the school that was dedicated to the magnet program, and there was the other section of the school that had everyone else. And so it was literally one side of the hallway and the other. So I enter this hallway, everyone that looks like me is on the other end of the hallway. I'm going to class on this side of the hallway with a bunch of people that don't look like me. I had a teacher ask me if I was lost, and try to direct me to the other end of the hallway. I explained, no, I'm like, this is my homeroom and stuff. And so that was an experience that was really difficult just right off the bat. And then it got even worse as the day progressed, and I realized I didn't really have anything in common with my classmates. We lived in totally different worlds. I didn't know anything about what they were talking about in terms of the shoes and what they watch on TV and what they do for fun and everything like that. And then we get to the cafeteria, and it is everyone from the magnet program on one side of the cafeteria, everyone else on the other side of the cafeteria. And I walk in and I did not know what to do. I look like the people over here, and they're the people that I feel most comfortable with. I go to class with the people over here. There's no rule that I have to sit any particular place, but I felt very trapped in that situation. And that's what it's been like to some degree throughout going through science and being in predominantly white spaces, this sense of not belonging. And so my first day in the cafeteria, I just did the classic, I don't know, movie where I just ate in the bathroom because I didn't want to make a choice. I went home, I told my mom about my first day. And I told her the scene in the cafeteria, and I described that there was this strip that was like no man's land where nobody was sitting. And she said, "Why don't you sit there?" And so that was the first time that I made my own table. So I just sat by myself at this middle table the next day. And then there were 3 other people of color in my magnet program. All 3 of them got up from where they were sitting and moved to my table. And we just had this table in the middle. And then the next week, there were some people that we became friends with that weren't in our magnet program but went to the school. They came. A couple weeks later, there were some people in the magnet program that we became friends with. They came. And so by the time that I left middle school, there was these 2 tables. We actually expanded to 2 tables where there was a mix in the middle. And I don't know if that mix stuck around after I left. I don't know. But for that moment in time, I was able to create a middle table where everyone felt included and welcome. And that's what I sought to do in my professional life as well. So I am a lot of things. I am a Black woman. I'm an opera singer. I'm an aerialist. I'm a D&D player, board gamer, musical theater geek, wig fanatic, lady boss. I am all of these things. And so I bring all of these things to the table with me in my science. And I think that that's really important for all of us to do, that we should never come into science spaces or any sort of professional spaces feeling like we have to leave part of ourselves behind, because that's how we solve a lot of these issues that we have, particularly in conservation. We have different ideas, we have different approaches to things, we have things that people haven't even thought about. So for example, my dad is a retired police officer, now a private investigator. And we were thinking about, just the other day, how do we get a camera on a shark that will run for more than 6 hours? And they said, "Oh, well, I know cameras that run for that long. My dad uses them, and they're small because he doesn't want people to be able to see them." And so now it's just a matter of how do we get that camera in a housing that can handle the depth and the water needed to go underwater. But people didn't know that that technology existed because they had no reason to interact with that technology. But I did, because my dad is a professional private investigator that is constantly using cameras to, investigate things. So when we bring our whole selves to the stage, we're able to have these innovative things, and all of these aspects of us are really important. And that's why diversity and inclusion is so important. So I live and work at the intersection of science education, marine conservation, and social justice, because I think all of those things are important. I think that you can only be successful in marine conservation when you have buy-in from stakeholders. And in order to have buy-in, people need to understand what the issues are, and be part of the solution. So that requires science education. It also requires social justice, because if you exclude some people from the conversation, you only have some pieces of the puzzle, and you will never finish the puzzle if you're missing pieces. I also want to acknowledge that all of the culture and everything that we bring to the table is really important. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I mentioned my father. Is a private investigator, built his own business. A lot of his entrepreneurial spirit comes from his father and his father's father. So the middle picture is my grandfather, Ernest. And then the top picture there is my great-grandfather, Luther. So Luther started the first funeral home that was Black owned in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And my grandfather, Ernest, he owned a gas station and was actually the first Black person in the entire state of South Carolina to own a gas station. And so that entrepreneurial spirit has trickled down to me. And I applied that to be able to make my own table, build this organization, Minorities in Shark Sciences, to address this issue that I see in marine conservation. I got my love of fishing and marine science from my grandmother, Evelina, that's up there in the corner. who would fish all day, every day if she could. So my family is from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. A lot of our food comes from the ocean. So very in touch with the ocean in terms of sustenance, and coming from a fishing background, I think I bring a lot to the conversation when I'm engaging with stakeholders from the fishing community, because I am a fisher. That is how I started. I started as a fisher. My family are fishers. And so I understand and can connect with those particular stakeholders in a way that someone that doesn't come from that background cannot. And if I wasn't in this space, who would speak for the fishers? Who would reach out to the fishers? This is why it's really important to have a wide diversity of backgrounds, because if we have everyone coming from backgrounds where they don't live off the land, they don't live off the ocean, they will never understand what it's like to, if you don't have fish, you don't have food. And so that is something that is really important to acknowledge when we're talking about who's in the conversation when it comes to diversity. So I had this dream of being a marine biology professor at an HBCU because I wanted to teach the next generation of scientists. I wanted to support and mentor students of color. I wanted to change academia and STEM from the inside. I wanted to be a principal investigator of a lab and conduct shark research. And that dream I still was able to fulfill. I just took a different route. And it's always okay to decide this path isn't for me. There are multiple paths to a destination. Sometimes we like to use the pipeline analogy, which I don't like because it implies there's only one way to an end goal. There are lots of paths to get to where you're going. And so I took a different path and built my own table. Because the space that I existed in, I felt wasn't good for me and wasn't good for people like me. So I opted to create a different space that would be welcoming and people would be able to still achieve what they wanted to achieve. So I worked together with these lovely women to create MISS in June of 2020. We met each other on Twitter and started communicating, and we realized the need for an organization like this. We opened or launched on Juneteenth in 2020, and we were met with a resounding amount of support. And from that, we decided with great power comes great responsibility. And because there are so many people that need this, it's our responsibility to make sure that we build this organization to be the best that it can be. And so we got our 501c3, started a nonprofit, and the rest is history. And I'll close out just by giving you a little sampling of the things that we offer at MISS, in case there's someone out there that is interested in shark research and identifies as a gender minority of color, or doesn't and wants to support our mission. There are many ways you can get involved. We have MISS members, so about 450 members, over 30 US states and territories, and more than 38 countries. You can see the breakdown of, career stages for folks. We also have our Friends of MISS, who are people that don't identify as gender minorities of color, but are in shark research, conservation, or adjacent fields and want to support our mission. For our members, we offer a series of professional development workshops and networking opportunities. We share resources. There's mentorship opportunities. We have lots of opportunities for our members. We engage in outreach, and we encourage and support our members to engage in outreach. So we supply outreach boxes that people can take and use to talk to people about sharks so that we can get the word out. And we can also have a variety of people and a wide diversity of people being the face of shark research so that people can see themselves represented in this field. We also have our Guild Guardians program, which includes both content for K through 12 and for adults. We have curriculum that lives online. We also do live webinars occasionally. We have our ambassador program where we train educators, both formal and informal educators, to deliver their content to the youth that they work with. We also have our Science by the Sea program, which allows people to come out to their local county parks and experience their coastal and marine ecosystems. We have our summer camp as well, which is a 1-week experience that brings kids from all over the country to Florida to experience ocean sciences. We have additional opportunities, including workshops for people that are 18 and older who identify as gender minorities of color and want to get experience working in the field. We do 3 days aboard a research vessel, learning how to deploy, haul gear, bait, take samples from sharks, safely handle sharks in a way that's safe for both you and the animals. We also offer fellowships for people to do month-long internships at our various partner institutions. Well, some of them are a month, some of them are 3 months. To do internships at our various partner institutions. It includes travel and a stipend, so it's at no cost to you. All of our programs are totally free. That is a commitment that we made, that none of our programs did we want to have a barrier, a financial barrier. So we cover from the time you step out of your front door to this time you step back inside your house. We also, like I said, have mentorship, informal mentorship, but we also offer 2 pairs of our mentors funding to support carrying out a research project in the field of shark research and conservation. And this all works through writing grants, doing partnerships, having collaborations, having a large network of people that have skills and resources, a lot of delegating tasks, trying to be efficient, staying self-motivated to create something that is meaningful and impactful to people, and then having a growth mindset and constantly learning and evolving to the needs of the people that we serve. So I'll leave you with my contact information here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have if I have time.
You certainly have time. Thank you so much for that amazing talk. Do we have any questions from the audience? So I guess I'll start with the questions. I'm really impressed with Miss and all of the stuff that you guys have been able to do and are continuing to do. I was just wondering, and perhaps this is an unfair question, but what has been your favorite part or like favorite program that you've run within Miss?
My favorite program. That's a tough one. I will say that one of the things that I'm most proud of is just the impact of 450 people. That's so many people coming from a place where I thought I was the only person that looks like me doing this. And then, boldly stepping out and saying, we're here, and having people say, I'm here too. And having so many people say that, I think is huge. And I think that it goes to show everyone that's like a naysayer that says, oh, it's because Black people don't do this, or Latina people don't do this, or, whatever, they're not interested in it. I kind of say, well, this sticks it to you because I have 450 people that say otherwise. It's not a matter of us not wanting to be in the space. It's a matter of us not being welcome into the space. And so I'm glad that we can use Miss to leverage and show people that there is another way and there is a better way to do things.
Thank you so much. And we just have some comments that I'll share with everyone in the chat. So M. Lim says, incredible talk, Jasmin. Rosemary says, fantastic talk. Kirsten, such great narrative. Thanks for sharing your story. Heidi, I'm familiar with Miss from Twitter, but great to hear the backstory directly from you. And Erin Judah, amazing talk, so inspiring. And Charles, cannot recommend Miss enough. Jasmin and co have done an amazing job setting up and running what has become a hugely important contribution to marine science.
Thanks, Chuck.
Moving on now to our second undergraduate presenter of today, Erin Judah. This is actually his first conference presentation, but you wouldn't know otherwise because he is exceptional. And today he's going to talk to you guys a little bit more about being inclusive to different faith groups.
Fantastic. So my name is Erin. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm coming from Halifax, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of Mi'kmaq people. I'd also like to recognize the over 400 years of history and contributions of communities of African descent and the 50 African Nova Scotian communities throughout the region today. So before I begin my talk, I'd like to talk a little bit about my positionality and where I'm coming from this. So I was raised in a bi-religious household. My mother is Roman Catholic from Italy, and my dad is Ben Israel Jewish from India. So we in India were there for over 2,000 years, originally coming from the Levant, which is an area of Jordan, Palestine, Israel, Lebanon. We spent time in India, and many cultures and many religious communities in India, like Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, influenced our traditions. So coming from those communities, I was able to experience many different religions in my upbringing. And so this talk means a lot to me, especially as my first kind of attempt at a conference talk. So before I begin, I'd like to also talk about what I did for this talk. So I went to go and speak to religious leaders throughout parts of Halifax. Of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There are thousands of religions and faiths around the world, and there are so many people and amazing stories to hear. But I managed to talk to a few of them. So I talked to a few rabbis, some imams, some leaders in Christianity, and some students as well, some people in Baha'i faith, as well as Buddhists. So I've covered a few religions here, but there's a lot more to do. So these are the religious leaders who are providing to you through me some key points on how to communicate with religious communities for science, but also how to include faith communities in EDI as well. So one thing to be really particular about here is how we define faith and place. You know, there's faith, which is based off of belief. Religion's a bit more organized version of faith. There is spirituality, which kind of crosses over everything. It can be a community, it can be your own individual spirituality. And there's also ethno-religion, which is probably the most related to place in that it's a religion or faith community that's tied to an ethnicity. So these are communities like who practice Judaism and Zoroastrianism. So these communities have languages, cultures, foods, things that they share, and a common geographic place of heritage. So when you're talking to faith communities and when you're incorporating faith communities in EDI, you want to use all of these terms to be the most encompassing out of the different experiences of the communities you wish to communicate with. So why do we care? One thing I've noticed about EDI as it's grown over the past few years is faith communities have been largely left out of legislature, of EDI statements, of initiatives and outreach. And I feel that this really needs to change. And why does this need to change? You know, faith groups are subject to discrimination and hate crimes on global scales. And this is on the rise, especially for especially Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and also anti-Hindu sentiment as well. People of faith are intersectional, so faith alongside gender, sexuality, race, all of these things create your identity. And faith groups are intersectional, so they can be a person of faith, but also part of a different community as well. As well, with the politicization of religion, especially in Judaism and Islam, people tend to attach faith to a government, a leader, or a military, and that is inherently wrong in that faith communities shouldn't be politicized. They are a group within on themselves, and they shouldn't be tied to the actions or made accountable for the actions of other entities, especially those motivated by political means. So these are reasons why we should really include these groups in EDI. So lessons from faith communities, let's get started. These are a few, but let's go into each of them a bit more in depth. The first thing is extremely general, and you'll find that all of these can be applied to just about any community you want to talk to or any community you want to do outreach with. So keeping an open mind, humility, and understanding. You know, you're talking to a community here that sometimes has thousands of years of history, of environmental ideology, of environmental ethics, of science involvement. You want to keep an open mind for their opinions and their understandings of things, you know, and this directly relates to humility. When a scientist comes into a faith community, sometimes on the most part, faith communities, you know, have strong histories of scientific involvement. So there's usually very good discourse, but in some cases, faith communities have different viewpoints on how science is practiced. So for a science coming in, it's important to maintain an open mind and be humble and not to, you know, dwell on that science is the only way forward for conservation or ecology. start where people are at. And this is something that was mentioned to me a lot by the rabbis who I spoke to, actually. And, faith communities have differing levels of knowledge on specific concepts. Faith has these texts that they have are super strong in their environmental history and in how they approach conservation, but they all come from different places. So one thing to do before you talk to any faith community, whether you're talking to, speaking at a mosque or a Hindu temple or even to a coven, it's really important to learn about the community and talk to people who know of that community, as well as read a few of their texts or a few excerpts to try and give you a knowledge to connect with them on. One thing that was really important, and that was actually mentioned to me by an imam, was respecting the scientific and environmental involvement of faith groups. This is something that's been, kind of forgotten in a way, especially because, there seems to be this viewpoint in science and in our general community that faith and science are always at odds. When in actual fact, can they cooperate? Of course, in that, many of the greatest, foundational revolutions in science were done by people of faith all over the world. Many Muslim scholars in mathematics and astronomy and geography, Indian scholars, Hindu scholars, in the same fields, also biology as well as medicine, especially from, spiritual communities throughout North America, throughout Africa and Asia and Europe as well. So it's important to not only recognize that, we stand on the shoulders of many communities, but also faith communities for how we perceive and deal with science. Something also is faith communities in the past, thousands of years ago, there was conservation before conservation. An idea for the respect for Mother Earth and engaging activities that won't harm Mother Earth is really prolific in Hinduism, specifically the Atharva Veda, which is one of the texts. Also, lessons on not producing waste or ecologically conscious agriculture is really important in Judaism, specifically in the Kiddushim. Also, the inherent value and respect for all life is in Buddhism, specifically Metta Sutra, and also in Wicca, as well as neo-pagan and natural religion. So it's really important to understand that, when you're approaching communities to talk about environmental priorities or conservation, also respecting their inherent environmental priorities of themselves, as well as their ways of knowing, because each faith community and each spiritual community on a larger scale has their own way of knowing conservation and ecology. Something a little bit different is also showing what works and what is working. Faith communities rely more on understanding. They are empirical in many cases in their history, but they also rely a lot on the teachings of specific leaders and or deities and prophets. So it's important to also match those specific powerful theological teachings with what's working empirically in conservation. So bringing together what you can provide and what you are seeing and communicating with them in a two-way dialogue is very important. And this actually brings me to this point in that, when you're you can't really separate these communities at the end of the day, because faith and science have the exact same, if not, goal. They have a sense of curiosity and mystery for the natural world. We all connect on wishing to understand more, wishing to unravel the secrets, whether it's through experimentation in a lab or whether it's through prayer and meditation. We all have the same values and all wish to work and understand the same things. So connecting with your faith community that you're working with in the inherent similar values is extremely important. And my final point, I think, is collaborating and communicating. I was corrected by a rabbi on this, and I said about educating the Jewish community. And he said, what does that mean? Because education assumes that a faith community doesn't know anything about ecology and the environment, which is not true. As I mentioned prior, these structures have been existent for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. And, it's important to redefine how we work with these communities. And any community with deep history is a two-way dialogue, which is point blank number one of science communication. You want to have that two-way dialogue with the person you're communicating with. So instead of keeping it as faith education, move it towards collaboration and communication. Aim to share knowledge, wisdom, and experience, and come through unification to a better result. And this is actually a concept that's very common in the Baha'i faith, where they unify a group and they come with a specific, way of dealing with a problem. And this is the same thing here. So how do you actually get into contact with any of these groups? One major thing is you start off with, I would start off with looking for contacts online. Religious leaders are always happy to meet on Zoom and or call. You can interact with the community beforehand. You can attend a service or an event and talk with congregation members. You can also speak to your friends. You probably have friends of faith who know communities or are involved in communities. If you want to take a hierarchical method, you can start with local faith leaders like imams, for example, in Islam. And then you can work your way to youth groups, because that is a wonderful and very, interested demographic who always want to see and hear what's going on in science, especially if you're doing interesting stuff in research. They want to hear about it and they want to learn about it. Faith community groups as well, run by both adults and youth. These are also very important, pillars of the faith community. So getting in contact with them, and then the further faith councils on a regional scale can enact larger outreach activities. So if your message is local, youth groups and local faith leaders. If you prefer regional or larger scale, meeting the councils is actually a really good method as well. And usually, and almost always, they are extremely interested in what you have to offer. So what are our action items from all of this? If I can sum up what we need to do, number one is inclusive languages for constitutions and statements and legislature. So incorporating, faith, religion, ethno-religion, and spiritual communities in all of this is extremely important. When you write that EDI statement, when you talk about legislation, you want to mention all of these communities to cover them all and make sure they all feel included in this. You want to collaborate with faith community groups, societies, and organizations in your event programming. Ask their advice, ask their advising. If you want to reach a faith community or any community in general, seek to have them advise you of what the best avenues are to reach them. Also, including diverse persons of faith in panels, discussions, and decision-making. They can contribute a lot to conservation and environmentally minded organizations. A major one also that I have to mention is avoid supporting events and collaborating with political movements that remove access to community and resources for faith students. This has become a lot more prominent, especially for Jewish and Muslim students in universities across Canada and America. And this is inherently degradative to these communities. So when you work with, faith groups, don't support these political movements that seek to remove them from the conversation in the first place. And ecology and evolution, providing inclusive food and diet accommodations for scientific outreach, fieldwork, conferences, and events. I have friends who are Jewish and Muslim who went into the field for 2 weeks, and the only protein options were pork. Of course, in Judaism and Islam, you can't consume pork. And the vegetarian options were slim to none, unfortunately, for this as well. So that was a major issue. And this happens a lot more than you would think. And I've heard horror stories across the board from many of my friends who've experienced this. Practicing understanding and compassion with students during times of fasts. Some faith groups will fast for upwards of 26 hours without food or water, and they're still expected to work, engage in field work, come to the lab. So when these students are involving themselves in laboratory and research or your outreach events, make sure you exercise compassion towards them, because it's not always very easy to not only dedicate yourself to your work and also engage, physically demanding situations while also maintaining respect for your faith. Also, avoid planning extensive fieldwork events or events during religious celebrations, so providing an inclusive lab environment. This actually made me very happy recently because I saw the Deep Sea Biology Society sent out a survey today about what religious holidays people celebrate and what religions people are, because they had found that some communities were unable to attend their conferences because of this. So this is actually a really great way of gauging community involvement. So I'll leave you today with a musing that one of the Baha'i leaders who I spoke to mentioned to me, and it's one of my favorite quotes now. Religion and science are two wings upon which man's intelligence or a person's intelligence can soar into the heights, with which the human can progress. It is not possible to fly with one wing alone. What this means is, if you think of science and faith as two wings on a bird, you need both to reach, your end goal. If you want to enact large-scale conservation and outreach, you should seek to incorporate both. And also, religious leaders have a lot of influence in communities. By reaching them, you can really spread your message across large-scale communities and also locally as well. So that's all from me, but thank you so much. I most greatly appreciate all of this. And also Shabbat Shalom, because it is Friday. I'd like to thank Suchinta, Melanie, and Diversity of Nature for everything and all the amazing people I spoke to. I'd also like to thank my grandparents, Nathan and Sophie Judah, and my Nona, Cosma Levi Soto, for instilling to me a deep love of my religion and my faiths, and also wanting to work with faith communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. You did an amazing job, especially given that this was your first ever conference. We're so happy that you could join us. And we already have a question from Kayla.
Sorry, it just took me a second to get ready here. First of all, thank you so much, Erin. I think that this is really amazing. I've been to a million science communication events and I've never heard somebody speak to this. And so I just want to thank you for sharing that. A couple of things that really stuck out to me were, first of all, kind of having that dialogue that science communication should be kind of a two-way street that doesn't assume the deficit of the person you're speaking to. And also what you're saying about, you know, a lot of these people already have values that would really be aligned with environmental issues. So I was wondering if you could go through a few more examples of where there might be these win-win opportunities where values align with current issues in environmental science.
For sure. So I'll bring back the Judaism example of waste. So there's a text in the Kiddushim which says, you know, it's against a mitzvot or Mishnah, which is like, you know, an important duty of a Jew, theoretically, it's against these teachings to waste, to tear down buildings and trash the environment. And I think, you know, if you're thinking about the current struggle we're having with plastic on a large scale, or fisheries debris or anything, even especially, you know, in India, we have major trash and problems with landfills, you know, by engaging the Jewish community in this and other communities which also support not wasting things, you know, you're getting you're bringing, you know, a new group to the table to speak about these things. So that is always a really good example. Conservation, you know, all faith groups, even like I'll bring, you know, some of the newer faith groups and some of the more revivalist faith groups. So like thinking about neo-paganism and Wicca, you know, these are natural religions that have deep respect for environment, for conservation. They already are on the ball with ecological science and interest. And many of them, you know, are heavily involved with activism in ecology. But unfortunately, because of, you know, barriers as well as misinformation around these, especially Wicca and especially neo-pagan religions, they're left out of everything. So if we give them inclusivity and a way to, you know, get heavily involved as they already are, but work with them, you know, this is the whole activism group and an ecologically very conscious group that, you know, can enact change greatly.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Erin. I hope you write this up and publish it somewhere because everyone needs to hear this.
He actually has plans to. Do you want to speak?
I guess I can, yeah. So we are working on a paper. We are currently looking for authors actually to help us because, you know, I realize I'm inherently biased to my own religions and I can't speak for other religions. So, you know, if you know people who are people of faith in science, we'd really love to have their input on this because we're trying to create a framework for how research in ecology and evolution can be inclusive to faith groups. You can also reach me my email. I can like send it out after people are interested, or social media. So, and I'm always like willing to talk or meet.
So Erin, I'm just going to pass on some notes from the chat here. Charles says, awesome talk, Erin. That was your first conference talk?
Thanks, Chuck.
Melanie says, Erin, this is one of the best talks I have ever heard. And Jasmine has seconded that. And I'm going to third it.
Thank you so much. Oh, awesome. Perfect. Thanks, Melanie. Great.
I guess I have one final question for you if no one else has any questions. And also you can also talk to Erin during the general question period as well. So my question is, could you tell us a little bit about your own journey in blending your scientific sense of self with your religious sense of self? Has that been more or less easy, or is something that's still in progress or something you've come to peace with?
Something in progress. You know, I remember I was in class once and one of the professors asked, do you think religion and science, you can be a scientist and practice faith? And the you know, many students were like, yeah, of course, but there were quite a few that were like, no, they're not interchangeable. And I kind of felt, is that, you know, does that mean I'm kind of like an impossible combination of this? And I went into reading, so I went back to the scriptures and texts, and part of me going back into Hindu texts and Jewish and the Quran and things of the sort was finding ways to meet what I learned in ecology and evolution and find ways to interpret the text in that way. And I did find those things. Reading ways of Genesis in the ancient Jewish texts, you can interpret it to, be alongside things like evolution and ecology. So that finding, also scientists of faith who speak actively on this and finding intersection between religion and ecology, their talks and their information has really helped me kind of figure out. And I'm still trying to decide, which I find, which I deviate to more, but I find that a combination of both and, an appreciation for the natural world is born out of my faith and augmented through my science. And I feel like that is where I'm at now. It's a basis of faith, but an application of science.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin. And I'm also going to second what one of the questions or one of the comments said, which is this is not something we ever really hear of otherwise. So we really appreciate you speaking out on this.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Okay, so I swear I did not do this on purpose, and only now am I realizing all three of the last speakers were shark researchers. So next up is Ana Martins, who is an international Brazilian student and postdoctoral research fellow studying shark conservation and ecology. And today she's going to speak a little bit more about her initiative that she started to reach out to Brazilian youth.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. First of all, I would like to thank Suchinta and Melanie for the invite. It's a huge pleasure to be here. So today I'll be talking about Maré Alta Education, and being really straightforward, Maré Alta is Portuguese for high tide, and that's the name we chose for a not-for-profit that was officially launched in December 2020. And our main goal is to provide educational resources to children and teachers in Brazil. And because we have a background in marine science as well, we want to share science to as many people as we possibly can. So the talk today will be a focus on how Maré Alta came to be, how the idea came to life. And to do that, we have to go back in time a little bit, like 4 or 5 years ago, when the first ideas of Maré Alta started to pop in my head, and maybe a little bit further back, when I talk a little bit about my story, which is directly related to Maré Alta's. So as Suchinta said, my name is Ana Martins. I'm originally from North Brazil. I have a degree in general biology, a master's in biodiversity and conservation, and a PhD in marine biology. And throughout my whole career, I've always worked on sharks and rays. And so here's a photo of me releasing a juvenile mangrove reprey after we tagged it with an acoustic tag to track its movement. And currently, I'm a postdoc at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Canada, and I work on a project that aims to better understand the global trade on shark meat. So I don't know if it has to do with my family or just the fact that I'm from Brazil, but I've always been really driven to socioeconomic causes. And since I can remember, from 7 years old, I was always volunteering and trying to do my part in the society or as a citizen. And I knew from experience that there, obviously in Brazil, there's a lot of inequality, and that comes from like economics and also in education. And I knew that that was happening. I could see that every day, but I don't think I had I couldn't fully grasp the extent of the inequalities until I actually left Brazil. So I moved to Australia to do my PhD in 2015. And I was shocked, 100% shocked with the infrastructure they had at the university that I was studying at, the laboratories, the libraries. And in my lab group, we also had a program that we would go to high schools, elementary schools, middle schools to talk about sharks. And I was completely shocked with the fact that every student had a computer. They had tablets, they had science labs, they had computer labs, they had sports. And like, I didn't have any of that growing up. And I was privileged. I'm not from a rich family, but I was also not from a poor family. So all of that was really shocking to me. And it started to bother me a lot. And I started to think like I need to do something, didn't quite know how to start. So then I started talking with Melissa, which is a really good friend of mine from Australia. Melissa works in aquaculture, and she continues to work at JCU. She's the co-founder of Maré Alta. And we clicked very fast because she didn't experience firsthand the inequalities in education that I have, but she was very empathetic, and she was also driven by the same ideas. And one time we were having this conversation, and she asked me to list the reasons why I thought that there was so much inequality in education in Brazil. And I came up with this 4 main things that I remember from the back of my head, like hearing about it or having some friends going through situations that they wouldn't have food, so they didn't have, you know, the energy to pay attention to classes and to do well in science, to do well in school. Or transportation, schools sometimes were too far away, or transport was too expensive. Family support, or just any support really. And that could be in the situations that families had to work full time and didn't have the time to spend with the kid and supporting them at school, or the family was not educated, so didn't have the knowledge to support those kids at school. And there was also the issue with school supplies. Those things, like I remember from a few examples throughout, you know, my childhood, but reading more about it and learning more about it, these are actually the reality. I was the exception. A lot of kids, most of kids in Brazil go through one or all of those issues at the same time. So Mel and I decided to take the first step. All of this problems are really complex, and it's really hard to deal with all of them. We started that maybe for a first step, we should focus on supplies. It could be a good way of starting it. And I mentioned to Mel that I have an aunt that works in a community school, and what she used to do back in the day is to get the kids to write Christmas letters, to write letters to Santa Claus. And instead of obviously sending it to Santa Claus, she would share with us, with family and friends, and we would get a couple of those letters and just buy the presents that those kids wanted. And because they are from a really poor background, they were really simple things like a soccer ball, slime, or a doll. So Mel and I having a conversation. So let's get those letters. Let's give them some school supplies, but also give them a present. It might be a good way of, you know, for us to start it. And that worked really well. So the kids wrote the letters instead of writing to Santa Claus. They wrote it to their Australian friends. So each one of our friends, we were about a group of 10, 15 people. Each one of us got a letter, made a small donation. We're talking about like $5, $10. And we were able to provide the presents that they wanted, and also a bunch of school supplies for the kids and for the school as well. And that was our first step. And when we realized that, okay, we can do this, we should start thinking of making this something real. For the next year, we continued to do the Christmas letters and gifts, but we also set up a recycling bin in our department. So our friends would bring cans and bottles that we would exchange for money. And towards the end of the year, we provided school kits for all the kids in that school, gifts, and we also helped with their graduation ceremony. So the education in Brazil was slightly different. We start very early. We started like 3. And when you're towards 6 or 7, you have to go through a test to make sure that you can read and you understand what you're reading. And in the private schools and fancy schools, kids also actually have a graduation ceremony for that. And the kids in the poorer schools don't get anything. So we helped them with that ceremony, which I understand the importance of providing the school kits, but I also feel like those experiences are extremely important. So they get to celebrate their education, they get to bring their families together, you know, and be proud. So I think that gives them an extra gas to continue and continue, giving priority to their education. And I like to mention this because even for me, being from Brazil, being from the poorest states of Brazil and knowing how things are difficult, even for me, it was shocking to know that some of those kids in that graduation ceremony had cake for the first time, had soda for the first time. So all of that make us feel that obviously providing school kits is the goal, is important, but if we can support some of these experiences is also really important for us. And then 2020 happened. It was a hard year for everybody. It was a pretty difficult year for me, for myself. I had just moved to Canada. It was my first winter. I was far away from my family. All flights to Brazil were canceled, so I didn't even know if I could see my family if they got sick. So it was just overwhelming the whole time. And that was the year that we decided that Maré Alta was going to happen, but it was also the year that I did not manage to put anything in place. But they gave me the energy, I guess, to come back next year with our first official campaign. We had a huge support from Diversity of Nature. And we continue to support the school that my aunt works, but we wanted to take, to start things from the beginning. So we chose a different school, a school that was going through a lot of hardship. It's a community school, so they don't have support from the government or any private sector. And they were also unfortunately hit by a bad storm, which affects their infrastructure quite heavily, and they also got robbed. And in that school, they don't provide books for the kids. They actually print all the activities, and the printer was stolen. So with our first campaign and support from Diversity of Nature, we were able to provide school kits for 640 kids. Also, we were able to buy the printer that they needed so much. And this school is in a lot of trouble, so we wanted to continue to help them. We'll continue to provide school supplies. We want to provide more resources to the teachers, such as projectors, computers. Maybe we're talking about maybe getting a small library since they don't have books. But one thing that I really wanted to do is to revitalize the outdoors of the school. As you can see in this photo, it's really not a safe or nice place for kids to be around. The playground is falling apart, there's concrete everywhere. So we're thinking of maybe getting some grass, some garden with vegetable and fruits, and some sort of a new playground in some colors, and hopefully make this area a nice place for the kids to hang out. So that brings us to our plans for the future. So we only starting now officially this year. So what we have is the plans for our second campaign that will be starting now, and it will probably go into July 2022, is to continue to help that school. We're finishing up our website right now. We're only on Instagram. And most of our campaigns have had the help of friends and family and Diversity of Nature, as we don't have a huge reach at the moment. So we want to, launch our website and other social medias to increase our reach. I'll be applying for grants and seeking sponsorship from private and public sectors, and ultimately, we have more ambitious plans, and hopefully we'll be able to put in place some of the scholarship programs that we have in mind, some computer and science lab programs, some library programs, and more things related to education to as many kids and as many schools as we possibly can. So to finalize my talk here, this is our Instagram page. As I said before, we mostly have help from friends and family, so we don't have many followers. So I ask you if you can give us a follow, spread the word, share with your friends and family. And if you can, please donate. Any $5, $10 make a huge difference for those kids. And I think that's it from me. I'm happy to take any questions. And I just want to thank you everyone again for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was great. Do we have any questions from the audience? I guess I'll start with a question. So often we hear from international students or international postdocs that their experience can be somewhat isolating because they're removed from their hometown. So has creating this initiative and reaching back and giving back to Brazilian youth kind of helped you feel more connected and reduce that sense of isolation?
Definitely. I've been feeling, and I've been talking about it to a couple of friends, that I feel a little disconnected now more than ever, because now I don't have even Brazilian friends here, people that I can talk my own language. So definitely having this project has helped me to connect and make me feel like wanting to come back, which I didn't want to for a while. So yeah, definitely did it.
That's great to hear. I also have another question about funding. So I know a huge part of making an initiative like this successful is about generating those grants. And when we've applied for grants for diversity of nature, there's a lot of ones that are available locally and nationally. So have you had a hard time finding grants that support education for international youth? And do you think that's a problem?
Yes, I think this is the biggest problem for me, because right now I'm in Canada, Mel is in Australia, and my team, people that are actually helping me to make things happen in Brazil. So it's hard for us to figure out where are we actually, where we are, where is the country that we're gonna be deciding as our home, and applying for grants for those places. I've been finding a few options here in Canada, but there's not much happening in Brazil. And I haven't found anything in Australia either. So yeah.
So something we can all try to work towards in the future, hopefully creating more opportunities so that international students and researchers can reach out and give back to their communities at home.
Yeah, that would be great.
The last presenter is actually me. So allow me to introduce myself. My name is Suchinta Arif, and I'm going to try to figure out how to share the screen. Okay, there we go. Okay, so thank you everyone for continuing to stay in this amazing conference that we were all learning from each other from. I thought I'd end this off by talking about Diversity of Nature, which is a BIPOC-focused scientific outreach organization that was founded by myself and Melanie Massey and is hosted by Dalhousie University. So how did it all start? So it was around June 2020, and there was a lot of racial unrest in the United States and elsewhere. And we were all having local, national, and global discussions about systemic racism, as well as trying to learn and unlearn as individuals to become more anti-racist. So Melanie and I took our dogs and we were walking in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, which you see pictured here, but we couldn't help but continue this discourse. And what we landed on was this: what could we do as two BIPOC graduate students in our relative position of power to make our academic spaces more anti-racist? And while we were talking about this, what we realized was some of the most fulfilling experiences in our own academic journeys was actually taking part in field courses and other immersive co-curricular ecological experiences. But these experiences were often very cost prohibitive. And when we were able to get into them, we often felt isolated because we were the only people of color there. So what we wanted to do was to reduce these barriers for the next generation of youth, especially BIPOC youth, so that they had access to these immersive ecological experiences that weren't reduced by financial situations and that they didn't feel isolated. So by the end of that week, we had decided on our initial goals. We wanted to create a cost-free mini ecological field camp for BIPOC youth, so around 15 BIPOC youth per year. And we wanted this to be led by BIPOC graduate students here at Dalhousie University. And for myself, my initial skills that I'm coming into this with was that I had previous teaching experience. So I had acted as a teaching assistant across like a dozen courses, and I was also a part-time instructor. Melanie and I also had ecological knowledge as PhD graduate students, and perhaps most importantly, I had a lot of will. And we were very grateful and privileged to get a lot of support when we started this initiative. For example, I got a lot of support from my supervisor here, Erin McNeil, as well as other departments within Dalhousie University. We received a lot of initial funding support from MEOPAR. We also received guidance as well as financial support from other outreach organizations such as Supernova, Imhotep Legacy Academy, and Wise Atlantic, as well as conservation organizations such as Nova Scotia Bird Society. So that was what we wanted to do at the end of the first week, and we are now 1.5 years into our programming. And so we have successfully established our annual mini ecological field camp. So here at the bottom, you'll see some pictures from our first ever field camp that we ran last summer. So we actually were able to run 2 separate field camps and hosted about 15 BIPOC youth for free, so reaching 30 in total. In addition, our program has kind of grown exponentially since our inception, of course, due to our willpower as well as all the support we got. So now we also have monthly workshops, and these really vary depending on the leaders that come into our program. So for example, we've had people run fish dissections, we've had online and in-person panels that connect scientists and early career researchers to youth. And we also have more immersive, cost-free experiences such as snorkeling expeditions. We also have annual scholarships for youth that participate in our program. So last year we gave away 10 different scholarships to those that were pursuing post-secondary education. And importantly, we have ongoing mentorships. So any participant of DAWN essentially becomes a member of our DAWN community, and we are constantly providing youth with resources that they need. So they come to us for advice on their future career or course selection and often ask us for references. And so far, we've been able to serve over 300 BIPOC youth through cost-free ecological experiences. And another important part of our program is to capacity build for early career researchers. So Melanie and I actually do a lot of science communication training through internships, as well as through teaching both undergraduate and graduate courses. Recently, we were fortunate enough to teach a graduate module to about 10 different graduate students, and we tasked each one of them to give a one-off science communication and outreach event. So that's gone really well, and they all came up with very diverse activities, which I'll touch on a little bit later. We also have leadership opportunities within our program. So for example, people can come in as workshop leaders so they can run their own science communication events. They can also help us write grants as well as create personalized roles. So for example, a previous workshop leader recently has been moved up to an oceans team lead, where they'll give more direction to DAWN's outreach as it relates to marine sciences. We also do want to pay it back because we got a lot of support when we started. So we try to help out other organizations now that we're a little bit more established. So my favorite example perhaps is providing startup assistance for the Afro-Indigenous Book Club led here by Damini, who was actually one of our first participants in our field camp. So she does a lot of outreach herself as well. So it's really great to kind of collaborate with someone that you taught and then now get to learn from them as well. And of course, we have other events such as this conference, which also creates these opportunities to capacity build. So I just want to go back to my initial skills that I started here with in the left. And I just want to mention that my own role in DAWN, Diversity of Nature, has led to me gaining a lot of skills. So in particular, I realized that I really enjoy grant writing, which is not something I expected for myself. So far, we've been fortunate to generate about $100,000 in grants, and we have ambitious plans for the future as well. I've gotten a lot of experience with program development, not only within Diversity of Nature, but I've also been invited for program development elsewhere. So for example, the Dalhousie Science Scholars and Leaders Program, which is a program aimed to increase the success and retention of historically underrepresented scholars that enter into science at Dalhousie. I've certainly gained a lot of leadership and organizational skills. So I have a much larger toolkit for effectively managing employees, as well as training undergraduate and early career researchers. I'm continually learning about inclusive science and outreach from our collaborators and peers. And working with Dawn has actually enhanced my network as well. So for example, my upcoming postdoctoral supervisor actually found out about my work through diversity of nature and not necessarily through my research. And I've also taken part in lots of pedagogy publications, which we have future plans for as well. And all of this to say is, when you're a researcher and you want to get into science communication and outreach, one of the things that you might hear is not to focus too much on that. So if you want to be a professor, which I do, the advice is to kind of focus on the research. Whereas I dived into this, and I have to say that all of these skills that I've gained, I wouldn't have otherwise been able to had I listened to that advice. So I'm just going to counter that advice and say, don't listen to that. If you're interested in science communication, please go after it. There's a lot that you can gain. So I just want to give a few different examples of some of the activities that we've done in our program so far. The first was led by Leah Cresser, who you see here on the left. So she is a Mi'kmaq First Nations ecologist who is doing her master's at Acadia University. And her idea for an outreach event was to take us all to the Bedford Barrens, which is an isolated wilderness area that has these 500-year-old Mi'kmaq petroglyphs. And here she took about 15 BIPOC youth and us, and she taught us all about Mi'kmaq history and culture, as well as Mi'kmaq ecology and medicine. And she blended these lessons with and contrasted them to Western science. She also went through her personal journey in science, kind of talking about the different barriers and feelings of isolation, as well as how she overcame them. And she ended us all off with a value affirmation exercise, where all of the students wrote down core values that were important to them. And then we as a group discussed how those core values can actually benefit and enhance science and science culture. So something like this, of course, benefited the students, who came up to us later and told us that this was very meaningful and not something that they would otherwise have access to in their mainstream education. But it also benefited Leah. This was one of her first times doing science outreach, and she realized that she really has a knack for it and she really likes it. And we're currently developing future plans with her as well. So here's my second example with Erin Judah, who you guys just heard from. So he decided to do a fish dissection workshop. And so he started out by giving a very dynamic and interactive talk on fish form and function, as well as fish conservation. And then we got all of the students to choose a fish, and me and Melanie actually went out to local fishermen and caught a bunch got a bunch of different bycatch available in the local community. So they were able to pick fish from their local community. So we always try to, one of the things we try to do is to try to connect the science that they're learning to their communities. And so they got to choose their fish and they got to dissect it. And so this is just an example of where you're still learning some core science lessons, such as fish anatomy, but in an inclusive and interactive way. And of course, you guys also heard from Hunter Stevens today, and this is perhaps one of my favorite events that we did this year. So this was a snorkeling expedition where the first day we really focused on safety and gear fitting. And then the second day we took 15 BIPOC youth and we threw them into the ocean, of course, with supervision and safety. And they got to have this very immersive experience where we let them explore their marine environment, and they were allowed to ask questions about what they saw. And what was great about this is this was the first time any of them actually went snorkeling. And so this is an example of like an experience that's very meaningful and can lead to inspiration and can lead to someone discovering their love of nature, but otherwise might be cost prohibitive. So this is why all of the programming that we provide is free of cost to our participants. So cumulatively across all of the workshops that we've run and all of the workshop leaders that we've interacted with, the main thing that I've learned, or that has been solidified for me, is that diverse scientific perspectives are good for science. So simply put, diverse scholars bring diverse scientific perspectives. And when we give diverse scholars the chance to highlight and integrate non-mainstream scientific perspectives into what they teach, this leads to a better scientific education for those being taught. I've certainly learned a lot through these experiences as well. And students have mentioned that a lot of the educational content that we cover is eye-opening and not something that they would have access to otherwise in their mainstream education. So I also did want to highlight some upcoming events. So one thing to note here is that all of these events actually stemmed from the graduate module that Melanie and I taught. So it kind of gives an idea of if you just give someone the tools to do science communication and outreach, it can have like a very wide ripple effect and essentially lead to a large positive impact and a large crowd being reached. So for example, Erin Judah, who did his first ever conference talk today, has very ambitious plans for putting together a Halifax Shark Week, which will be an immersive week of science activities where people will learn about shark diversity and conservation. We also have a scientific illustration workshop led by Emily Young, where she'll take participants out into nature and then give them the tools to learn how to draw specimens by hand. And we have an upcoming stingray dissection to be led by Anna Martins. So my concluding thought, I guess, would be to not let yourself stop you from doing the things you want. When we first started and we first had this ambitious idea, we had some resistance from professionals that was like, oh, are you sure you guys can do this as just graduate students? And it was really my stubbornness that said, no, of course we can do it, and we don't want your help. And we went for it anyway. So I personally feel that early career researchers are very relatable and they have a lot of knowledge. And perhaps the thing that kind of stops them from going through to doing these science outreach initiatives is their fear that they're not good enough, or that they might mess up, or that they might not know enough. And my main advice is to just go for it anyway. I think you learn as you go and you do have the skills. I think what most people have more than the skills is imposter syndrome. So you just have to kind of tone that down and go for it anyways. So I will end with that. Does anyone have any questions? Karma?
Hey, Suchinta, that was fantastic. I had a question, like, that's a ton of grant money you guys have managed to pull over like a relatively short amount of time. And like, my first question is just like, well, how do you feel like that grant writing differs from, typical purely research-based grant writing? And do you find there's much of a difference in terms of like where the money is coming from? Is it like a lot of very diffuse small grants, or were there a couple that contributed most of that and then there's like a little bit of extra, or what's the distribution like?
Yeah, so we were very fortunate. Our main grant was through a MEOPAR Fathom Fund, which is meant for research, but it's also community-based. So what that does is you start a crowdfunding source, and then if you're successful in reaching your goal, so we had a goal of like 12,500, and if we reached it within a certain time, MEOPAR quadrupled it. So we did reach it. So we just went out and we made like a crowdfunding website and we reached out to everyone and we reached it, and that got turned into 50,000. So that really helped. And essentially that was half of that 100,000. But just getting those things started, of course, makes you more successful for up and coming things. So we are hoping to apply for NSERC Promo Science, which is coming up. And I think we have much better chances now, having had some success before. I would say that it depends. I think there are some grants where it's not at all like a research grant, whereas other grants, it's the same kind of language and skills. So there's a lot of variety in the grants that you can apply for.
Cool, thanks.
I might just add to that a little bit, more of a comment, but just the fact that the community came out and supported that crowdfunding initiative, I think really shows that there is a desire for this type of inclusive outreach from the community. And so I just hope that that can act as encouragement for anyone who does want to do their own outreach initiative, because this is stuff that the community wants, and I think to a large extent that the community needs.
Alexa, you had a question?
So we've heard a lot from folks today who have started their own organizations, businesses, research groups. And I know that there are a lot of youth out there, a lot of early career professionals and scientists who are also thinking of doing the same thing, but oftentimes they're just overwhelmed and don't really know where to start. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for folks who are looking to start their own organizations, businesses, research groups, whatever. What would some of the first steps be? And what's some of the advice that, or things that you wish you knew before you started?
So I think one of the things that absolutely helped, and I could not have done this without her, is Melanie Massey. So my main advice would be to work with your friends, but find friends that you can work with as well. So if you work with a group where it's mutualistic and you guys can all benefit from each other's skills. And sometimes this will become really obvious. So like Melanie and I kind of work really well together and we have a flow. And other times you have to kind of think critically about who to bring on and who to work with. So I think having a support system, especially if you're starting something as big as an organization, is huge. So that would be my main advice. Melanie, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think, well, two things, I guess. One, if you're really just getting started and you're not sure what to do, you could always try and work with an existing organization. And this was some advice that we were given. We sort of reached out and found out what Supernova was doing and Imhotep's Legacy Academy, among the other local organizations. So that could be a really good way to start. I think some of our speakers, myself included, have started out by like volunteering with existing organizations. And I think the second thing would be to talk to members of the community and see what they want, because that can help guide your vision and make it integrated with your local situation.
And the second part of that question was, what did we learn? So the biggest lessons learned. For myself, was that it, Alexa?
Things that you wish you would have known before starting.
I see.
That advice that you would kind of pass on. I know you kind of alluded to that a little bit.
Okay, yeah, so my answer remains the same. One thing that's really important that I didn't know, so I had previous experience teaching, so I knew about like that dynamic where you're serving youth. So that went really well because I had that previous experience. What I didn't have previous experience with is managing other people. So that kind of like employee relationship. So, and sometimes you don't know, like how else was I supposed to know those things until I did it for the first time? So unfortunately, there's always going to be things you don't know, but to have kind of a growth mindset and not let your ego get in the way. There's going to be turbulences, and that's okay as long as you reflect on them and move past them and learn and update yourself. I think especially when you're growing an organization, there's so much going on, right? So you do have to put in some time to reflect and learn and make things better for yourself and the organization. But okay, so here's my advice. Training, there is training available. So if you feel like maybe you can have some foresight and there's some skills that you don't have, like take advantage of any training opportunities that are there. Kristen, do you want to go?
Erin's first.
Oh, sorry. I don't know why it's back.
It's okay, it's okay.
Erin, do you want to go?
Sure, that was amazing, Suchinta. Thank you so much. Also, I was DMing Suchinta on every comment for every talk, so everyone did amazing. So you didn't see any of that, but like, yeah, Suchinta knows at least. So my question to you is then, so I've heard a lot also that you can't balance science outreach and communication and research. You have to choose one, and like you have to sacrifice another. What is your advice for balancing that and then, acting upon it?
Yeah, I've heard that too. And it's we hear that a lot from everyone everywhere, really. Like we're actually collaborating on a paper that's about making science culture more inclusive. And during the end of that discourse with these other two professors who are great and they've been super supportive, they also told us the same thing. They were like, oh, like maybe you need to balance. And I really don't feel like it is about balancing the two. I think one kind of really lends itself to the other. I know my PhD experience wouldn't have been this fulfilling if I didn't take part in creating diversity of nature. And I don't feel like it takes away from my research. I think it kind of makes things more interesting and dynamic. So it gives me more creativity so that when I do get back into the research mode, like I'm really ready for it. And it also helps with all of these like communication skills. So like all of these like writing, like if I'm teaching a course, of course, that's going to be, you know, helped through all of the science communication that I do. Or if I'm writing a paper, all of like the grant writing and all of like the communications I have to do with other people that I'm looking for funding with does come in and help with that narrative.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Melanie, did you have a slightly different answer to that?
Well, that sums up my feelings perfectly.
Kristen, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I was just wondering a little bit in terms of finding grants for these kind of things. I'm involved right now in a very new startup to do like an online educational platform for BIPOC kids, and it's mostly in the United States, but just a place to start for looking for those kind of grants because we're going to start needing money pretty soon. So I don't know if you have any ideas on where to.
Yeah, so I guess
Yeah.
my main advice would be to not look at any one particular spot, but just to be very opportunistic because you never know. And also don't have any shame. So when I first started out, I like spammed everyone. I did not care. And so like I would spam 100 people. And if 10 people got back to me, that was great. Like I wasn't worried about the 95 people. So don't pigeonhole yourself in one avenue. Just like be opportunistic and look for all the different avenues. And even like for me, like even if you don't think that that organization or person or program might be helpful, but you think that there's some level of commonality, reach out to them anyway. Oftentimes the people that have provided us with funding, I would not have really expected that funding to come from them in the first place.
Okay, thank you.
And of course there's like the main ones as well, such as EcoSciCommCon.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I will say one more thing. So often there's these official rules. So like, for example, EcoSciCommCon, you can apply for only 30% of what you already have for the year. That's the official rule. But if you talk to other EcoSciCommCon people, they'll let you know that you can count like volunteer work or like if someone's like renting you a room for free, like that can count towards that 70%. So just make sure to check up on the unofficial rules of things.
Always asking questions. When in doubt, ask questions.
Also, like this is a very inclusive community that we're all a part of, like inclusive internationally. And people who have won these grants before are 99% of the time willing to share their applications with you and give you tips. And we've really benefited from some of that mentorship from other organizations as well.
Also, if I can add to that, did you guys ever check out any of the grant writing, like free courses or any of those kind of things, or did you mostly just dive into it from what you were used to using for research?
I just dived into it with my own intuitive skills, and I realized that I love it for some reason. So it just kind of worked out for me in that realm. Mm-hmm. But I could have used training in other realms, but that's one that kind of really jived well with me. Cool. So at this point, let's open it up to a general question and answer with all of the speakers for this session. So Erin, maybe you want to ask your question to Jasmin?
Yeah, sure. So Jasmin, I'm really new to the shark science field and marine conservation field in general, and MISS has done so much in promoting diversity and really changing the climate in shark science. How do you feel it's changed, and what do you see for the future of, diversity in shark science?
That's a good
super
question.
General.
So changes that I've seen have been more so related to leading by example, I think. So there's a lot of shark-focused organizations and things like that that operate on the pay-to-play model and have, things in place in their foundational structures that are barriers. And by MISS coming around and removing those barriers and showing that it's possible to remove those barriers, that I think holds a lot of those organizations accountable, which is how we got a lot of our partners. So all of our partners they reached out to us. So we've never reached out to anyone to ask them to partner with us, just because we want people to meet us halfway. And so we aren't going to go chase people to change how they are. We're going to present that there's a better way to do that. And if you choose to change and start making that first step, we're more than happy to work with you. And so we've had lots of organizations reach out to us and say, hey, I read this article, or I saw that you've been talking about this, and we've done some internal reflection. We've realized that we're part of the problem. So we want to try and be part of the solution. So here's our ideas. And I think that's probably the biggest impact that MIS has had, is just holding those organizations accountable, even like, scientific societies that I'm a part of and stuff. I think that leadership is getting on board, and starting to think more about these things, and which is great, which is what we wanted MIS to do, to show that there's a better way to do things.
That's fantastic. Yeah, shark science really needed that. So thank you dearly.
Do we have any other questions for any of the speakers, even from the speakers, or any general questions?
I had one for Karma about museums. If you're still
Sure,
there.
go ahead. I think he is.
Do you think the kind of stigma around like museums are boring is going away, or do you think that's still like a very real problem that you guys face day to day?
That's funny. I don't know if I've ever heard that stigma, but maybe I'm too like biased and like into museums. Like I have completely ignored like a fact that might think that. Do I think that there's a stigma? I definitely think one thing is I can sort of see it in that like sometimes museums have, I think, a bit of a reputation for being very like staid and like stoic. And so I think if there is some aspect of that going away, like I can't honestly say whether or not it's going away, but I will say that there is, I think, a bit of a push in museums in terms of like making more of their stuff accessible online, and approaching science, or not even just science, like non-natural history collections in a way that's like a little bit like more like fun and lighthearted. So if I don't know, maybe this is one of those, I'm doing The Simpsons, like I'm out of touch with the children. Maybe I don't know that a lot of people found them to be a little bit boring, but hopefully some of like that changes like for that purpose then. It's not really something I've like ever explicitly tried to like tackle in the outreach that I've done, but it's also, I get a very biased sample because the people I interact with tend to be ones who have come and are spending their free time and sometimes their money to see us anyways. So actually, I kind of feel like the interesting point that you're making actually makes me like reflect a little bit on the fact that like, some of the efforts that we have, I mean, it's very good to have a metric that goes up at the end of your week, but it's not necessarily always hitting all the demographics we think they might be. I feel like I walked around your question there because I didn't have a good answer.
Okay. No, that's good. I didn't really think about that either, that it's a biased sample because people are there that usually want to be there. Do you think also too, like the biggest barrier to modernizing museums and stuff, especially in Canada, do you think it's more funding, or do you think it's like people that don't want to change the way that things have been?
I think both must factor in, but I would say that the division is probably like 90 to 10. Like I think the funding is the big problem there. A lot of museums don't have the staff required to like even maintain the collections that they built up. I was trying to run some numbers on this just that the museums have been part of, but if you look at the sort of average staff size of departments, it used to go to a point where like there was like twice as many research staff, significantly more support staff. Sometimes departments would have like a departmental administrative assistant or secretary who handles so much of the logistics that like the collections could be taken care of a little bit more like robustly. And so things like digitization, I think is what you mentioned there, but like digitization of collections, it's something that was like, museum research is weird in that I feel like it was very much like a buzzword type thing about 5 years ago, but now we're moving on to other things, and we didn't even get enough money to do that first part properly. Like we need to digitize a huge amount of information. It has the number one, the benefit of like making secure that data, especially as we've seen in other museums where funding goes away and suddenly they don't know where to put their physical specimens, or in even worse scenarios, the actual like destruction of like museums as happened in Brazil last year. least digitization is something. But where do you get enough people to process them all? Not every place is well equipped for that. But I know that there are a lot of academics out there who would love to, kind of like, I forget his name, but he was mentioning this earlier, would love to transition from pure research into more, science plus like part of the administration roles. But there's no funding for those positions, at least based on my experience.
It takes a lot of time. I'm doing like photographing right now of a bunch of invertebrates to put in from a museum here, and it takes so long to get all the pictures and get everything up. So yeah,
I know, and collections are so varied that, like, it's not just simply a matter of throughput of specimens under a picture, right? The techniques that you use to take a picture of like a parasitoid wasp and like an invertebrate fossil are entirely different.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right, so I think if we don't have any more questions, I'm now going to hand off my hosting responsibilities to Melanie, who will have some closing remarks.
All right, I'm just going to keep this really short and sweet. I think all of us learned many different things today, and I thank you all so much for sharing these diverse perspectives and diverse toolkits that everyone's been using to do their science communication and outreach. And I'm just going to finish off with some thank yous, of course, to all of our incredible speakers for sharing their knowledge and sharing their time, for our audience members who have come out and listened and supported this, and a special thanks to Suchinta, who really did largely organize this conference, and to MEOPAR for funding it. Without their support, this really wouldn't have been possible. And I think really that's what I'm going to conclude with, but I thought it would be nice for everyone on our way out to just share a highlight or something in particular that they learned or something that inspired them about today's sessions. You can throw that in the chat or just turn on your camera and we can have a little chat now. But thank you everyone so much for coming.
I don't know if I have one highlight. I liked that we had 2 undergraduate students that this was like their first talk, so that was a highlight.
Yeah, it's definitely incredible to see, what some people are capable of doing like this early in their career. And we've even worked with a couple high school students who themselves are kind of making waves in our local community. And it's just awesome to see.
Em said, Jasmine's story of literally creating her own table in middle school or high school has really stuck with me, and I have to agree with that. A lot of inspiring talks, and I loved that how infectious everyone was. Like, you can tell if someone is, like, Em was so enthusiastic about iNaturalist that everyone else became, maybe we're all nerds and we were already all enthusiastic, but it felt like, for me at least, I'm going to download iNaturalist like right after this. Alexa, did you want to go?
First, thank you to all the speakers today and our conference organizers. This was an incredible day of presentations and learning. I think one of the biggest takeaways and reminders for me is that failure is totally okay. And the best way to get through the learning curve is to just learn by doing and to celebrate those failures. I mean, especially as early career folks, like most of us are, we're probably all way too hard on ourselves. So just knowing that it's all part of the process. Also very excited to try out iNaturalist. I haven't used it before, so going to be doing the Halifax challenge.
And there's a competition now that Em's given us, so we better get to it.
Jasmine, did you want to comment?
Yeah, so I wanted to share, I think, a lot of people said this, but I wanted to thank Erin for his presentation, because this is something that I talk about a lot in spaces with people that are always like, oh, we don't know how to reach communities of color. And I always say, we call communities underserved, but they're served by someone, and often those are faith organizations. And so if you don't, the best way, I always tell people the best way to get in touch with the Black community is to go to the church, because in the Black community, church is the hub of everything. But as scientists, people are afraid to go to the church. And I think we saw that with COVID. The most effective strategies of getting people to understand about what's going on with the pandemic was going and teaching them at churches where they are. So thanks to Erin for talking about that very important issue.
Thank you, Erin. He's gonna
Absolutely.
be freaking out because you're his role model. So I'm sure that's coming from you. Mariel?
Yeah, hi everyone. I also,
Ariel.
hey Melanie, thanks for the time. Yeah, I wanted to say, as someone said in the chat, this has been like one of the most fun conferences I've been to. So thank you for everyone who gave a talk. And I wanted to pitch as someone who's organizing something very similar to what Melanie and Suchinta have been doing over there at our end here in Toronto with bringing students out into the field to do stuff. I would love to get like a list of resources or a summary of everyone who participated today and all their events and stuff that they're planning, so that way I could give the participants in my event to share with them other initiatives that they could get involved in or could try to contact if they'd be interested in those. If people would be comfortable sharing resources about their own events, that would be great, because it would be nice to have a whole collection to be able to present students so they don't have to do the work themselves to find it.
That's an awesome idea. Maybe we could get an editable Google Doc going for everyone here, and we can just add to that as we go.
That's a great idea. Okay, I'll read some comments from the chat, starting with Karma. Loai's like Eye of Neptune was shocking. I've already reached out to a colleague who could maybe make use of that technology. And then we have people really excited about INAT. Zongwa said this was the most interesting conference that they've been to. I can't keep up. What a fantastic day. Thank you to the speakers for organizing. You're welcome. Thank you for coming. All the talks were great. Erin stood out in particular because when I was much earlier career in 2010s, it seemed conflicts between science and religion were coming up all the time. Hopefully that attitude is on the way out. And Jasmine says, totally agree. Also, I want to collab with all of you. Oh my God, you do? That, I love that. I was thinking that, but I'm like, maybe I'll say it after. I don't want to put like pressure, but that's great. I'm always down to support and create communities of practice. That would be amazing. I would love nothing more. And I know, well, Erin would also love nothing more. So that's great for everyone here.
Yes, me and Erin are about to be best friends. I just got a email. So get ready, Erin.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. This was so much fun.
Thanks so much.
I love that we were able to learn from the participants and the panelists and everyone. So it was very collaborative. Thank you all.